Everybody, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Chris Hall and I've got my lovely guest Adam Britton with me today. For those of you joining around Australia, welcome. I'm assuming that most of you, if not all, will be NDIS providers. And today we're going to be talking about SIl Budget Mastery. So to do that, I'm going to whip through a few slides myself, and then Adam's going to have the main chunk of the presentation, and there will indeed be questions and answers afterwards. If you've got any questions and answers, please put them in the chat. And as the host, I'll get around to that very soon. So what I'll do is I'll just start by getting up the slides on the screen, and we're just going to get right into it today and talk about how we can add value to you as a SIl provider. So Adam, just to check, can you see my slides okay?
Yeah, I can see those fine, Chris.
Fantastic, thanks, mate. Okay, so just to kind of introduce the session for today. What we're going to be doing is going through a variety of subjects, but for those of you that have not met me before, I'm an NDIS business coach that specializes in sales and marketing. I live and breathe disability. Recently, I got diagnosed with autism, so I'm autistic level 1, lower support needs, and guess what? My hyperfixation special interest is disability and marketing and sales and business coaching. So like I live and breathe this. My son is a participant. I got a small provider business on the Central Coast, and I just love helping lift the standard in the industry in terms of what we're doing as business owners and managers. My expert guest today is Adam. Adam Britton is one of the co-founders of Resolve. You may have seen him on other webinars, but if you haven't, Resolve specialize in helping SIl providers save money and be more efficient in the way that they do their rostering and billing process for SIl providers in particular. And today, I want to kind of cross-reference a few other webinars that we've got. So Pete Provider has got a variety of webinars at the website. And one of them is on rosters of care, which is how to maximize the ROC tool. And if you haven't seen that already, I'd highly recommend that. This is a great complementary one to the types of things we're going to talk about today. That goes through an hour, and it's a really incredible and technically focused session. The other webinar that we also have is Mastering SIl, and that goes for 2 hours. And Adam and I really go right down the rabbit hole of talking about strategy and a variety of nuances that I think we rarely get the opportunity to talk about when we're just, should we say, by ourselves as a provider. So couldn't recommend that enough as well. In terms of our agenda for today, I'm going to start off with a few slides answering the question, why do SIl plans typically run out of money? Then we're going to go over to Adam, who's going to do tips and tricks on how to translate a roster of care to a schedule of supports, plus some service agreement tips, and then we'll go to Q&A. So let me kick off with indeed the core question of how do we run out of money? The answer to that goes across the 4 following categories. There can be often an incorrect usage of, quote, irregular supports from a budgeting perspective. There can be many incorrect practices when it comes to us liaising with support coordinators that, get into our service agreements. They can often be wrong and they don't marry up and match fundamentally what the roster of care says. And of course, there can be changes of circumstance. So all of those 4 things are very real. There are some things that we can do to either eliminate bad practice, and we can also do things to mitigate risk. And I hope that the following slides will add a lot of value so that you can find ways to avoid running out of SIl budgets for your participants. So first of all, let's talk about irregular supports. So the following screen definition is irregular supports are the supports needed for unexpected situations, not your day-to-day. 2 particular examples could be the participant becoming ill, or for example, a day program is cancelled. Now, whilst that's a useful official definition from the NDIS, it's still useful to break apart some mini case studies on what to do in what situation. So I'm going to do that now. And before we do so, I need to give a caveat. And the caveat is that for anyone that's going to be getting a new SIl plan, either as of now or in the near future, it's going to be different going forward. The irregular support budget is going to be within the singular home and living support category. So there are changes ahead, but for those of you that already have participants with existing SIl plans, they typically last for 24 months. and they will still, from a service booking perspective, there's going to be one main budget item for your regular supports, and then there's a separate service booking for the irregular supports. So with that caveat mentioned, have that in mind, because I'm going to be explaining how to deal with irregular supports with the classical, soon to be outdated at some point in the future model. Okay, so this is correct in the nowness of things, but there are changes ahead. Okay, so let's actually talk about some scenarios. So scenario one is, let's imagine Lucy goes to a day program. It's 5 hours long, but it's been cancelled for the next 2 weeks. So if Lucy is a SIl participant, what you should do is, since there's been 2 day program days that have been cancelled, that would be 10 hours of irregular supports to be claimed from, here's the important bit, the irregular support service booking. Okay, so you do not want to take it out of your normal SIl budget, because if you do so, that's when you are, it's like kind of like metaphorically death by 1,000 cuts. If you just continuously do these small drip feed deductions from the main SIl budget, eventually you're going to have a rude awakening when you realize that you've run out of money at, month 11 out of 12, for example. So to help avoid that, make sure that situations like this are, as long as it's possible to deduct from irregular support service booking, deduct it from there. A next example is about, having illness. So let's imagine that your participant normally has one-to-one support. However, he's broken his leg. And as part of breaking his leg, he therefore requires 2-to-1 for 8 weeks whilst his leg heals. So that is indeed a useful and correct use case of irregular supports. So we would add up the financial cost of that second support worker. So it's not both the support workers, it's just the second person that is that 2-to-1. And we'd again reduce that claim from the service booking for irregular supports. We do not want to claim that second support worker out of the normal SIl budget. Next, we've got hours above baseline. So Adam will use terminology like, what's your baseline cost from a roster of care point of view? And what Resolve do is do an incredible job of calculating true financial baselines and rostering baselines, so that SIl providers can do best practices such as weekly billing, for example. And that's covered in the other webinars in depth. So can't emphasize the importance of having a, quote, baseline from an hour and dollar point of view, because when you've got a clear baseline, it allows you to make a mathematical acknowledgement that hours are going beyond, quote, the baseline. So in this scenario, let's say shifts normally go to 9 p.m., but the person's unwell. They need us for an extra 2 hours at night time as an active shift. And therefore, we've got this 2-hour additional period of time that goes for the period that they're unwell, and that also should be claimed from irregular supports. Next could be an example of an inactive overnight. So let's imagine that your support worker is on a sleep shift, and that typically in a SIl house might go from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. In that example, when you claim for an inactive overnight in the price guide, if you actually read the detail of the price guide, you claiming those few $100s, that actually includes, from a billing point of view, paying your support worker for up to 2 hours of active supports during the night. So if they were up for 1 hour, half an hour, etc., you don't get to claim any more money when it's less than 2 hours. Okay. From a Shads Award point of view, indeed, you need to pay the person for getting up. But again, that makes a distinction of billing is different from payroll. Okay. But then if we wind it into saying, let's say someone's up for 3 hours during the night, that then shifts into going beyond, being up for 2 hours. And therefore you can indeed bill for that, that differential in that scenario. So what you should do is indeed have these baselines clearly documented. And in the example of saying being up for 3 hours, 3 hours minus the 2 hours that you get to bill for, that's 1 additional hour of additional irregular support that you should claim for. So you've really got to have great reporting in terms of the rostering system that you use, so that you can make clear delineations in terms of exactly how many hours at what time did someone get up, etc. so that you can calculate this type of stuff. So I suppose one of the wisdoms I'd say is that, don't just verbatim take exactly what a timesheet from a rostering system would say. Like, really examine, whoever's generating your invoices, really examine the exactness of things so that you can pick up on scenarios like this. It's quite crucial to be that diligent. So those are some examples of, irregular supports and how you can claim from irregular supports in a more effective manner. If we then go on to some of the incorrect practices that can happen, it's really common that support coordinators will give either verbal or written instructions to providers to, quote, just do 2-to-1 for a bit, or just do 2-to-1 until this is sorted. Now, in the letter of things, they actually don't have the authority to do that. So they cannot tell you formally to do increased supports. They do need to follow the change of circumstance process, for example, with the NDIA, even though that is frustrating. And it's a bit of a bind, right? So we just need to be really formal about this and say, technically speaking, a support coordinator cannot actually tell us to do that. So having said that, providers of their own accord, maybe in collaboration with the support coordinator, they can collect evidence in a variety of forms through allied health reports. You might get the OT in to advise a functional assessment, for example, and then using that evidence from an allied health perspective, you as the provider can notify the NDIA that for medically clear reasons, you need to, for example, go from 1-to-1 to 2-to-1, or you need to do additional hours of XYZ. And then when you're notifying them, you should not only attach the necessary evidence, but you should do financial calculations that clearly demonstrate that their plan will be exhausted 2 months early, for example, as a result of this. That then is diligent, accurate, and at least has a bit more of a hope of prompting the NDIA to actually respond. We will be talking about this a bit more later on, but yeah, it's an important distinction. Technically, the support coordinator cannot make that decision. It's the NDIA. So we know how slow the NDIA can be. So one of the fallbacks is basically to notify with evidence and also notify with exact projections. So having said that, indeed, these are all the caveats coming out. There is no guarantee that the NDIA will fund the difference. So you are definitely running the risk of exhausting funds. Having gone through this type of thing myself as a managing director, I have heard the agency say things like, if the provider exhausts funds too quickly, that's their problem, not ours. So just be really clear that you can't, it's not a light thing to say that you're going to be burning through funds at a quicker rate than are intended as per the plan. So it's a dicey game. What can providers do in addition to notifying through evidence and projected exhaustion dates? What they can do is that early on in the actual intake process, in your service agreements, in meetings with all the stakeholders involved, it can be very beneficial to set up much clearer boundaries and expectations that don't just place the risk on yourself as a provider, but have a more collaborative model to say, in the event that funds are exhausted, these are going to be the contingency plans. This is how we're going to deal with housing. These are the people that we're going to call upon for support, etc. And again, I won't go into that too much now because Adam's going to be covering that a bit more later on. So it's not an easy answer, but again, we just need to be clear that technically the support coordinator cannot tell us. It's only technically the NDIA that can do so. So the best things you can do are notify, evidence, projections, and upfront mitigate risks by having more of an insurance model with your participants, so that the risk in the event of this scenario is a mutually managed risk and not just all on you. Because again, having lived through this, I see this time and time again as a coach. It's really financially confronting for providers because they feel morally obliged to continue supports. But I have heard too many stories now of providers being typically $100,000 in the red and not always getting any of that money back because these types of things have happened. The next reason why money can run out is that there's an inaccurate schedule of supports, and the schedule of supports, can be a separate document. It's typically embedded inside of a service agreement. And the reason that can happen is that a roster of care is complex, and it can be difficult to translate that to a schedule of supports. So again, Adam's going to give some tips on that. In addition to that, you may have, with 24-month plans, a schedule of supports that was correct, 2 years ago, but then it goes across potentially 2 July price guide increases. So therefore, literally the dollars go up, but the number of hours, if you don't do it right, stay the same, and therefore you burn through the budget too quickly. I've lived and breathed this example where we were going for a change of circumstance. The NDIA just renewed the plan and had the exact same number of dollars as they did 2 or 3 years ago. And we realized that we couldn't put on supports until 11 p.m. as was traditionally done. We needed to pull that back to 9 p.m. accordingly for the participant. And if we hadn't done that pullback, then again, we would have been in the same situation. So, if you think about some of the things that might be advisable, I would suggest that for all of your SIl participants, as soon as July 1 hits, you really need to review whether those increases in the price guide are palatable, and whether you need to adjust your rosters of care accordingly. We just talked about that third example there, so that's all good. Next are indeed changes of circumstance. So it can be very much medically necessary. It can be, from managing a risk point of view of both participants and or your staff. These are very real things that might mean that it's necessary to do so. And as you do so, a change of circumstance needs to be submitted. Again, if you think about the way to do it incorrectly, if a change of circumstance happens and you just go on what the support coordinator is telling you, then if you don't get allied health evidence or advice, then you're exposing yourself as a provider because you haven't, first of all, sought the evidence and you haven't submitted the evidence to the NDIA. You've just taken their word for it, which actually they're not meant to formally do so. And as we said before, you are in your rights to submit the evidence, but again, just be aware of the risks that there's no guarantees. So those are some of the key reasons. What I'm going to do now is try and, for once, be brief, and I'm going to actually pass over to Adam now to go into his slides, because I think that the real meat of this presentation comes into how we translate the roster of care into something that we can use as a schedule of support, and how do you bake in the necessary service agreement tips. So Adam, over to you, mate.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. Just quickly, we've got a couple of questions. We are doing the Q&A session at the very end, but I'll quickly answer these ones and then I'll get straight into my material as well. So the first question is, will this session be recorded? I believe so. Is that right, Chris? We'll record it and then provide the link so it can be watched at a later date. Yep. What's our take on weekly billing and NDI saying that we cannot bill more than the allocated weekly amount? How would you be exhausting funds early if you're billing only the allocated weekly amount? So the way we would do this is we'd still have our set weekly amount, and then in addition to that, we'd have the irregular support. So you can continue billing irregular support out of the standard booking, therefore exhausting the funds early, and you keep track of what was the standard, what was baseline, and what was the additional support that you've been providing in line with the allied health recommendations. It's a really good way to track and delineate between how much someone's funded for and what they actually required. And it's a good way to put forward a quote to the NDIA for the difference as well, to say this is the cost difference that we've incurred by providing the recommended support. Irregular SIl and SIl codes are the same. How do you separate the two in your invoice? The way we separate it, if we're doing a bulk upload file, we'll have one line item being the regular SIl. Underneath, we'll use the exact same line item, but we're going to code it. There's a little code inside the bulk upload file. It would be IRSS. It stands for Irregular Support Services, and that will delineate the difference between one line item being your standard, your baseline, and then the second being your irregular. So you're right, it's the same code, it's coming out of the same budget essentially, but we are differentiating the two using that identifier code within that bulk upload. If they're plan managed, it's the same thing. If I was invoicing through Xero, for example, I would just do two separate line items, one being my standard weekly, and then underneath I would do same code, same line item, but I would label it as a regular support service, and it would say something like cost difference due to providing active, cost difference due to providing 2-to-1 support transfers. I would just label it. Good for record keeping purposes, good to keep the plan manager informed. It's just good overall to know what your baseline is and then what the additional cost is, and constantly keeping those two separate throughout the process while you're waiting for the approval from the NDIA.
Love it, love it. And again, if the concept of baseline is confusing, etc., then I think the other webinars really do a great job of establishing exactly what we mean by that.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. Give me 2 seconds. Get this one up. Let me know if you can see that okay, Chris.
Coming up. Yep, sure can.
Perfect. Chris has already mentioned it, but we did cover off the roster of care, and we went quite in depth in terms of how to create a roster of care, tips and tricks, what you need to know, and really give you a good insight into how difficult a roster of care can be if you're not sure what you're doing. So really encourage you, if you haven't watched that, watch that video, watch it back when you get the opportunity, and that's going to lead really well into what I'll be discussing today. But the key takeaways from that webinar were rosters of care do have a dynamic nature. There's a group perspective to a roster of care. Ratios are not fixed, they're flexible throughout the day. And fundamentally, it's a quoting tool. So it's really important to understand when you're building a roster of care that really the end result is simply to work out what the cost of a support is. What is the cost for the support you're providing in a group model, and what should you be billing? That's fundamentally all the roster of care is. It's a bridge between the cost of the support in a group model and what you should be billing each individual. The best thing I can encourage you to do is to really understand the concept behind portions. So when I talk about portions and rosters of care having a dynamic nature, ratios not being fixed, what I'm really referring to is the way we look at individual funding in a group model. So we could have 4 participants in this example shown here on the screen. We've got participant 1 who's sitting at a 2-to-3 ratio, participant 2, 1-to-3 ratio, and participant 3 and 4, 1-to-2. Now, if you were looking at this and thinking of ratios as a fixed amount, you may be thinking, well, that's 2 support workers to 3 clients. That's 1 support worker to 3 clients, and that's 1 support worker to 2 clients, and so on. The way I want to encourage you to look at this instead is to think about it as a portion or a contribution towards 1 support worker. So this is 2/3 towards 1 support worker. This is 1/3 towards 1 support worker, and so on. So if I combine these ratios and look at them as a portion or a percentage, it works out to still be the same amount of support workers. So 2/3 becomes, say, 66%, 1/3 is 33%. I add those together, I get 100%. So I get 1 support worker. The key difference is participant 1 is contributing a higher amount than participant 2. And that would primarily be due to the fact that participant 1 has a higher level of funding. And the reason they have a higher level of funding is likely because they have a higher requirement for support. So they need more support. Even if they're sharing 1 support worker, they're going to be using more of that support worker's time than participant 2. So that's really how I want you to focus on that concept as I talk through the schedule support process. So I want to start off with how to create a bad schedule support process. I know it looks strange writing it like that, but a recent concept was introduced to me. It's called inversion thinking. And it really helped me with this particular slide. And the reason being is working for Resolve, we see service providers really struggle with this process. We see a lot of bad ways of doing it, right? And we see very few proactive or efficient ways of getting a schedule support process bedded down. So day in, day out, we're seeing really poor processes, poor practices, and it's much easier for me to focus on those poor practices and then invert it. So if I'm thinking of an inversion concept, it's you look at it in a bad way of saying how to create a bad schedule support process, list all the ways I would do that, and then you simply flip it on its head. So we'll start with example 1. If I want to create a bad schedule support process, I would rely on a historical roster of care provided by someone else. So the way we invert that is simply, I would not rely on a historical roster of care provided by someone else. I would do my own. So that's how I want you to think about it as I go through each of these points, is simply invert it and you'll get the solution to your problem. It's a really clever way of working through issues if you get a bit of creative block, like I did on this particular slide. So I just wanted to share that with you. It's something that helped me. So number 2, I would not take the time to do the correct calculations. Number 3, I would not base my quote on the actual support being provided within the SIl model. Number 4, I would rely on software to solve the problem for me. Number 5, I would focus too much time on ratios. I would really try work out what my claim should be on a ratio rather than a portion. I would not take into account community participation funding, which is going to result in poor utilisation of the budgets. I would not make the necessary updates to the roster of care as changes occur. I would have a fundamental process breakdown between my client services team and my finance team. And I would follow a welfare model rather than an insurance model. I wouldn't share responsibility, which is something that Chris mentioned earlier, is sharing that responsibility, that financial responsibility amongst all stakeholders and not just you as the provider. So if you're over-servicing, for example, it's sharing that responsibility out. And as I said, the way we would invert this to get the correct schedule support process is simply flip these on their head. And that will guide you in creating a much better schedule support process. Now, why is it so important to get this right? Why is the schedule support process one of the most key areas of your SIl business that you really need to focus on and spend a lot of time getting right? The reality is not getting it right is going to cost you. As far as Resolve has seen, and we've worked with many providers, done a lot of health checks and done a full review of the support they're providing, the cost of that support, what they're billing for that support, we see disconnections in almost every single provider. And if we look at averages, so if we look at all the data set that Resolve has with all the providers we've worked with over the years, this is our average data set. So the average SIl budget is $291,000 per year. Average roster leakage is $25,000 per year. And I'll explain a little bit what it means by roster leakage. Average claim leakage is $10,000 per year. So your total average leakage between roster and claim is $35,000. The average roster leakage per participant is 8.6%, and that does tend to be scalable. So the higher the funding amount, the higher the leakage is. The percentage model actually works a lot better because it is scalable. The more funding you're working with, the more things that can go wrong. And finally, the average claim leak per participant is 3.7%. So if I'm looking at this average leakage in SIl using this model here that you can see left of screen, the light blue would indicate my claim, how much I'm actually claiming for the support I'm providing. The dark blue indicates how much I could have claimed for the support based on the budget. So I'm not actually claiming the full amount I could be. I'm leaving funding behind and it's costing me. I'm providing the support, I'm simply not claiming for it. And the orange represents the cost of my roster. So this is what we call roster leakage. So I'm providing far more support above baseline than what I should be, and I'm likely not even aware that I'm doing it. So if you combine the claim leakage with the roster leakage, it works out to be $35,000 per participant per year on average. And we see that time and time again. And it's one of the biggest things that Resolve can help you with, is actually getting this under control. And the first step of that is doing our health check for you, and we can identify any leakage that may be occurring within your business. So what does the NDIS compliant process look like if we're looking at it in a flowchart? If we have a catalyst for a change in roster, which could be a change in CP schedule, someone moving in or out of the SIl home, funding change or needs change, and you can expect the catalyst to occur at least once per month. This is how the process should flow from that point. From that point in time where the catalyst is, the next stage in that process should be the development of a new roster of care, which is essentially, as I said, a quote, in consultation with the client services team, who have a really good understanding of that client's needs, and they work directly with stakeholders and the client themselves to intimately understand what those support requirements are, which is why we consult with them. And this roster will reflect the changes and the start date of support is formalized. From that moment, your claim amount is updated based on that new roster. the new roster is implemented and the schedule of support for each individual is updated. Makes sense, right? And looking at this in terms of what the golden rule for the NDIS is, it really does fit within that golden rule. So the golden rule, what I call the golden rule, stipulates that providers are responsible for ensuring that the claims for payment that they make accurately reflect the supports delivered. This includes the frequency, volume, and type of support. Providers are also required to keep accurate records of claims, which are subject to audit. So that's why that process flow works so well, is it ensures we're meeting our requirements as a provider. If I was looking at this as a bit more of a simple way, or trying to think of a continuum of sorts, this is how I look at it. So this is a simplistic way of really thinking about what your requirements as a provider are in a really high level way. So if we look at the supports that someone's funded for, that should match the supports being provided. And the supports being provided should match the supports being billed for. And if everything's so far on track, the supports you're billing for should match the supports funded for. And this just continues on in perpetuity. What we tend to see is a complete breakdown between these three core categories. Very often, the supports funded for aren't equaling the supports provided. There's a disconnect between those two. Furthermore, there's a disconnect between the supports provided and the supports billed for. This is your claim leakage. So we've got roster leakage, and then we've got the claim leakage, and then finally the supports being billed for often rarely match the supports that are initially funded for. So there's a disconnect between these three core categories, and we see it time and time again. The concept is simple. Getting to this point is very, very tricky if you don't understand how to get there. This is what we tend to see. So you saw the correct process, this is the incorrect process. So we have our catalyst for a change in roster. Unfortunately, there's no development of a new roster of care. That process never occurs. The claim amount tends to remain based on historic information. And then the new roster that's implemented is usually based on opinion of support, or it's not updated at all. So what I mean by opinion of support is perhaps client services have met with stakeholders, they've worked out what support makes the most sense to meet that person's need, and that's the roster that's implemented. Unfortunately, there's been no cost comparison compared to the funding and whether the funding would actually allow for that roster, whether there's alignment or not. And then lastly, our schedule of support sits out here in no man's land. It's not updated. It doesn't reflect the supports being provided. And this is where you can really get into trouble not meeting that golden rule. It's really difficult to show evidence of the claims you're making against the support if you're not doing this process correctly. And this, unfortunately, is what we tend to see. And in my opinion, it's not an easy thing to get right. I do not blame providers for getting this wrong. It is such a complex model to understand, and it takes so much practice to get right. And the roster of care tool is not a perfect tool. There's many shortfalls within the roster of care tool, which actually make it more and more challenging for you as a provider. So if you're getting it wrong, it's completely understandable. It's not something that's intuitive or very simply laid out by the NDA as to how you actually build a SIl model that's compliant, that makes sense, that is in line with the funding, that you're billing correctly for, and so on. So what are the rock shortfalls? We've got multiple start and finish times in reality. So if I'm looking at a roster, I may have a start time of 2 p.m. on one shift and a finish time of 8 p.m. on that same shift, but then I have another shift that goes from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. One of those shifts is in the weekday rate because it doesn't exceed the 8 p.m. finish time. The second shift does exceed the 8 p.m. finish time, so it's in the weekday evening rate. But on my roster of care tool, I can only insert one start time. What start time do I enter? It's not an easy thing to do, to match a roster of care tool to the actual support being provided. The other issue is 15-minute increments are not possible on the roster of care. So if my roster says 3:15 finish time, I can't insert that on the roster of care tool. Now, the developer of the roster of care tool did add an adjustment section into the tool. They recognized that it wasn't perfect and there were times that a provider may have to go in and adjust it slightly due to these two reasons I've just mentioned. But that's not very easy to use either, to work out what the adjustment should be in a percentage or in a decimal. Very, very difficult. It takes a lot of time to understand how to use that adjustment section. And there's no guide. There's no instructions or guides you could download from the NDIS website that will guide you through that. The public holiday uplift is a custom rate, which I'll explain a little bit later in the next slide. And the roster of care is incredibly time consuming. It takes a lot of time to keep your rosters of care up to date. And that's primarily due to the fact that they're dynamic in nature. The reality is the roster of care tool is not designed well for a group model of support. And if you feel like it's difficult to use, it's not just you. Me, for example, I probably spent upwards of 1,000 hours developing my skill set within the roster of care to get to a level of competency that I felt I was efficient in using it, that I could actually insert that skill set into a process that made sense at a scalable level. Now, since then, I've had thousands of more hours invested, and I can take what I've learned and apply it at scale, but it's taken me a very long time to get there. Unfortunately, there's no webinar I can show you, no guide I can give you. The reality is it takes a lot of time, and you're going to have to spend the time doing it. There's no easy way around this, and it's one of the most difficult roles to employ for, because how do you employ someone that would have this skill set in such a large industry? So if I am converting a roster of care into a schedule of support, though, say I have got my adjustment section correct, I've got myself to a point where I'm efficient enough to get this completed, this is how I would do it. So I would go to step 4 of the roster of care, which is the summary section. I would look at my varying rates, which we've got weekday here, weekday evening, Saturday, Sunday, public holiday, sleepover, and active. And my SB totals, which you can see on that I boxed here with the arrow, they're the totals I would use for my schedule of support, and I would apply them against the applicable rate. So 12.08 would go to my weekday, 20.08 goes to my weekday evening, and so on. When I was referring to the public holiday uplift not being a custom rate, this is exactly what I was talking about. You can see 2.35 has been listed on the public holiday. I've seen providers make the mistake of charging 2.35 at the full public holiday rate of $138.20. Actually, this is a custom rate. It takes into account that the public holiday rate replaces another rate. So if the public holiday fell on the Monday, for example, it's going to replace the Monday rate and then the public holiday rate will come in instead. So this unit of 12 here would be reduced because the public holiday rate would instead, and so it's a custom rate. That custom rate isn't written anywhere, it's not in any guides, and you have to actually spend the time to understand how you get that to that custom rate. So again, it's not a very intuitive thing to understand or do, and it takes a lot of practice. So what's the solution? This is our solution. This is Resolve's solution to this problem. It's something we're very, very proud of, and it's something that's taken us a long, long time to develop based on our experience and our collective knowledge of NDIS and the SIl model as a whole. So the Resolve process would be there's a catalyst in change for a roster. Resolve are informed of the changes. So if we've partnered with you, you would inform us of those changes from the catalyst. We would develop an updated roster in consultation with your client services team. We go one step further, and we also meet with workforce planning if you've got that team available, because we understand that a roster isn't just about the clients. We also need staff that will fill that roster. It's no good having a roster that makes sense on a support level without having support workers to actually deliver that support. So we understand it's a balance. The next steps would be that Resolve would provide the updated claiming to your finance team. We would provide updated roster templates to your workforce management and rostering team. And we send out updated schedules of support for signature on your behalf. And we facilitate conversations with support coordinators, guardians, the participants themselves if they've got any questions. We do all of that for you, because it's as much as it's a compliant process, there's also an education piece here as well. There's so much misunderstanding around SIl and what the expectations of a SIl provider are and what you can and can't do. So we educate as part of this process as well. And the last step of the Resolve process is we provide reporting on funding, support being provided, and claiming on an executive level. Very often we find that when it gets to an executive level, there's a real breakdown on the visibility around each of your SIl homes. If I were to ask you the question, how is each of your SIl homes performing? What's the cost of the support in each SIl home? What are you claiming for each SIl home? We find that on the executive level, they simply can't provide us that information. So that's what we do for you. We provide you that information where you could delve into each SIl home and understand it on a very accurate level, what this SIl home performance is like, because it's important to know. You want to ensure your business is sustainable for the long term. We also keep accurate records of the support that has been provided and the associated claim for that support. And this way, if ever you get an email from the NDIA questioning your claim, we have that information on hand. We had a very recent example of this where our customer did receive an email from the claim and payment assurance team at the NDIA questioning an overclaim. Now, this was an agreed overclaim. We'd already emailed the NDIS about it. We had all the supporting evidence. We had the baseline cost and the additional cost on top, provided all of that to the CMP team, and they were happy. They said, no problem. Thank you for the thorough information you've provided. All good. Continue on as you are. So it's really beneficial to have that worked out in advance. My question to all of you when you're looking at this is, if not resolved, then who? This function in your business does need to be performed by someone who is very competent in the SIl quoting space. It's not a role that can be delegated or shared out across multiple teams. And it's not particularly a function that we see perform well by an intake team, for example, because they're simply not merged enough into other functions of the business. Client services and finance team have their own roles and responsibilities. So it's understandable, now you've seen how complicated this can be, as to why they wouldn't be able to perform this function within your business. If you are providing SIl, and have a process flow that looks like this, that's fantastic. But I'm confident that it's unlikely you would have a process flow that looks somewhat like this. I'm sure if you're looking at this right now, you'd probably be questioning where you're currently at within the SIl space and what changes you need to make within your business. Or you may not even be aware of where your SIl is at in terms of how much funding is there available, what support am I providing, and what am I claiming for that support, those 3 key elements I talked about. And what I want to offer to all of you who are attending today is a free health check. So again, as part of what Resolve do is we come in and we provide you that information. We will look through every SIl home that you have. We'll show you the cost of the support you're providing, what you're claiming for that support, and what the participant was initially funded for, and give you a full breakdown across a business level in terms of how your business is performing. So Chris will put that up on the screen now. And if you're interested in that health check, please reach out and we'd be happy to give you a hand with that.
Yeah, that offer's up there now, Adam, and I can't emphasize just how much often you don't know what you don't know until you know it, right? There can be gosh, I'm flying blind, I don't know what the answer to this is, and that's one of the key values of this free health check, just to really see what the dials on the dashboard of your business are saying financially.
Yeah, definitely. The last 2 slides, I'm going to talk really quickly. I'm mindful of time. I've tried to get through this as fast as possible for you guys. Again, if you want to hang around and ask questions, more than happy to hang back and I'll answer any questions you have. If you have to get going, please feel free to reach out to the Resolve team. We're more than happy to answer any questions you have at any time. Yeah, that's what we're here for. We're passionate about what we do, and we're happy to help you guys in any way we can. So what fundamentals to include into your SIl agreements? I'm not going to talk too much into these. I'm sure you're all aware of what your fundamentals are, or at least should be aware. And these are straight from the NDIS price guide itself. So talking about what supports and services you've agreed to provide, the prices of those supports, and so on. I'll leave this slide up. You'll have it in the recording as well if you do want to look back over it, but it's also listed in the price guide. And it's what I call the fundamentals. And I'm sure you understand this on a fundamental level, that you need to include this type of information in your agreement. So I'm not going to go on too long about it. What I do want to talk about are those grey areas, those real nitty-gritty areas that you tend to get stuck in. So really, what do you need to consider, and what's a good what's something you should be including in your agreement to cover off this grey area what I call it. So what happens during a plan extension, for example? If someone's plan extends and you already have an agreement in place, what do you do as a provider? Do you issue a new agreement? Do you extend the current agreement? How do you manage hospitalization or inconsistent support? So if someone isn't receiving consistent support in the home, do you continue billing? Do you not continue billing? How do you manage that? It's not a vacancy. You can't fill their bedroom because their belongings are still there. They're coming back. So what do you do? How are you minimizing how often schedules of support need to be sent? What flexibility have you left yourself? For example, like I said, a catalyst can occur once a month, at least once a month. Are you sending a new schedule of support every single month, or have you given yourself some flexibility with your customers to say, hey, we understand your needs are going to change, and you agree for us to adjust your needs, and we'll keep you updated instead. We're not going to issue a new schedule of support every time. We'll just keep you informed. We'll provide it to you, but we don't require a signature. You agree for us to adjust your SIl claim marginally, for example, and ensure we stay within budget, and we'll just keep you updated. That'd be one way you could potentially do that. Exceeding a budget, what steps need to be taken and what's the contingency plan that you have in place. I'll talk about that a bit later. I'll get through the rest. And again, for those who have to go, please reach out. But those who would like to stay back, we can cover this one in a little bit more detail. What if someone wants to use their CP flexibly? So they have SIl funding, they have CP funding, but what happens if they want to each week just decide when they want to go out? How do you actually roster a SIl support worker when you don't know what their movements are going to be? What do you do if a participant doesn't want to share their SIl budget and that's their right to do so? How do you safeguard yourself as a provider if you don't have access to that information? How are vacancies handled? How are you factoring in that cost and ensuring you're still providing a level of support that's acceptable, but still being as cost effective as possible, bearing in mind that vacancies are considered a provider cost? What is the agreement during periods where there is no signed schedule support in place? Very often when we go from one plan to another, there's a small period in time there where you may be waiting for information. You may not have the NDIS plan available yet. You may not know the funding information yet, because it goes from one day to the very next. So the plan will end, for example, could end today, 12th of March, and the new plan would start the 13th of March. It's unrealistic that within that time frame, you could build a new roster, understand what the new funding is, and adjust accordingly within a 24-hour period. So what do you do during that interim? And if someone requires one-to-one support, but that exceeds the overall budget, can that still be provided in a shared model? Is that something you can work out between yourself and your customer? Can you still meet their needs with one support worker? And this is one that I really try to educate providers around. Is they say, well, this person needs 2 hours of one-to-one. How can I possibly provide that level of support when I can't get a support worker to come in for 2 hours? Look at it holistically. Look at it. I always say, look at it practically. I have a support worker background myself, so I really try to think about what was it like for me when I was a support worker. And when I'm delivering support to a person, even if I have multiple people that I'm delivering support to at any given time, I'm not providing support to all of them at once at the same time all the time. I may be giving personal care to one person, and that's a one-to-one, and then the next person I'll deliver personal care to, and that's a one-to-one, but still within a shared support environment. So I'm still meeting each of their needs, but it's only me on shift. So it's not to say I can't still meet someone's needs in a shared support environment, if that makes sense. Just because you have one support worker and someone requires one-to-one and that one support worker is responsible for multiple people, doesn't mean you can still make that work. It's looking at it holistically and understanding the SIl model on a very individual level, rather than focusing, again, on ratios too much and getting yourself stuck there. In saying all of that, we could do a bit of a Q&A now, Chris, and if anyone's got any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you for that, Adam. That's really fantastic. So yeah, we've got a few questions coming in from Laura Conlon. So kind of two questions here. I'll read them both. So first of all, are you saying that a participant exiting a house would impact the billing of the other participants, and would it change their billing? That's one question. And then also, but if we're already billing the allocated weekly amount and quote, everyone is meant to be seen as an individual, then how can we increase the other participants' billing just because the one person exited the house? So it's just alluding to this whole dependency of multiple participants in a house. So I think if we go back to that original question, we can go from there. Are you saying that a participant exiting a house would impact the billing of other participants, and would it change their billing?
No, it wouldn't impact the billing, it would impact the support. So I'm not talking about necessarily changing how much we bill for them, but if someone has left a SIl home and there is dedicated support that's been put in place in that roster that was actually meant for them, that support will need to be removed. Otherwise, it's going to be an out-of-pocket cost for you as a provider. So it's essential that's why it's a catalyst. If someone leaves the home, that's a catalyst to reassess your roster, to go, do we still need this level of support, or can we reduce down? Because if you don't reduce down and someone's left, guarantee you'll be out of pocket for that roster. That's what I mean. So it's not necessarily increasing the billing for someone else to fill that gap. It's re-looking at the roster and working out, do you need to make any reductions now that that person has left? What was
exactly.
the next question? Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, there's a couple more coming in. Yeah, they're coming in thick and fast. So please put them in the chat box if you've got questions.
No
so Juliet has asked, what do you do when a client does not have SIl funding but needs SIl support whilst waiting for a change of circumstances?
It's a really good question. It's case by case. If they don't have SIl funding, what funding do they have? Do they have flexible core, for example, that we can tap into while we're waiting? And this is, It's a question that it's kind of a bit of a trap question. Not the person asking this. What I mean is, if you've got yourself in this situation as a provider already, this is what I've talked about when it's shared responsibility. It's probably too late. You may have agreed to something that you shouldn't have maybe agreed to. These are the things you work out in advance. So if someone doesn't have SIl funding and they're waiting for SIl funding for a change of circumstance, and you accept them in, you follow that intake process and accept them into your SIl model, you've taken on that risk. You've taken on a welfare model approach, essentially, which means you're probably going to incur a cost there with the hopes of getting a successful review. Now, this is a decision you'll have to make as a business. Do I want to accept this risk? Bearing in mind they may not get a successful change of circumstances. And what happens if they don't? What's your contingency plan? What have you agreed upon with the customer and stakeholders? So it's case by case.
Yes.
Hopefully they've got flexible core funding, which will get them through until the change of circumstances. But if they don't, you really need to decide, do you wait to intake until they get SIl funding, or are you going to take that risk on as a provider?
Well, yeah, exactly. And if you do tap into that core thing, you need to be very, okay, let me ask you a candid question, Adam. Let's imagine someone's got flexible core funding, and that core funding, if they carried on at the previous burn rate, it would last them for the next 9 months until the end of the plan. But let's say if you increase the supports, and by increasing the supports, it would only last them 6 months. Are we allowed to do that? Is it ethical? Because they're going to be running out 3 months early. What's the go for that? Because we know that changes of circumstance could take 6 months.
We're not removing the risk of burden or someone's right to make a risky decision. If they want to enter your services and you've given them the cost of that service, to say, look, that's fine, we're happy to provide the support that you're wanting, and here's the agreed cost of that support, and they say, yes, I accept that cost, they also need to accept the risk. So this is their individual right as a participant under the NDIS insurance scheme to accept the risk associated with over expenditure on their budget. They need to accept that risk. They're going to enter into a service that exceeds their budget. This is again the whole welfare model concept. Providers tend to lean more into the welfare concept and want to try to do the right thing, but this is where they run into trouble. It really is a shared responsibility, and the more we can empower individuals to understand the risk that's associated with the supports they're receiving, the better outcomes we'll get. I truly believe. I think it's an empowerment thing to say, we can provide this support, but here's our limitations as a provider as well. It's meeting halfway.
Yeah, I hear you. 2 more questions so far. Vicky, hey Vicky. We had a participant over Christmas. We were working with the support coordinator, and we were told that the new plan was on its way. So we continue to provide support. Can you talk us through options at that point in time? Right, so when you know it's on the way, but you don't know yet. Yeah,
this is a great example of where there's that period in time between one scheduled support to the next, while you're waiting for information. This is what you can work out in advance. So in your previous scheduled support, you could include a condition in that scheduled support under your T's and C's to say, hey, we understand that there's going to be periods of time where this scheduled support may cease, and we're waiting for information for your next one. You agree for us to continue providing support at the same level. We'll continue claiming it as agreed until we get access to that information. And you can go into a bit more detail around how you'll do that. Time length, so how long, is it 30 days, for example, that you'll agree to, and then after 30 days, you'll follow these steps. It's making them aware in advance that, there are going to be times between 2 schedules of support where we may not have a signed one in place. And if you can agree in advance around what's going to happen in that scenario, that's all you can do. We're not, NDIS isn't asking providers to perform miracles. They're asking providers to keep their customers informed.
I have a true story on that one, just to kind of add to it. I want to hear what you have to say on it. I had a participant that was at 450K at budget for 450K annually. That was their budget. And the change of circumstance had been put in. It was over the Christmas period, like Vicky's scenario. And the change of circumstance did not come through in time before the end of their plan, right? So it came like in February later on. And so what the agency told us as a provider, they said, their words were, if the change of circumstance does not come to a conclusion, in time for the rollover date of the plan, then that 450K will automatically roll over basically as of the new year. That's what they said. And so that gave us, in that scenario, it gave us a degree of financial certainty to go, okay, well, you know, at least we can make some adjustments based on that. That was exactly the same scenario where I said we had to make it from 11 p.m. to 9 p.m. because of the 2 price guide increases that happened since then. Do you have any comments on that? Do you see that pattern as well, where if it doesn't happen, the plan's rolling over? Does it just tend to roll over based on the previous exact dollar figure?
We see plan extensions occur a lot. Obviously, NDIS, their staffing is not quite where it should be. Unfortunately, they've got their own restraints, and they're people too. I'm sure we can appreciate how hard their job is at times. So there's going to be periods in time where they can't quite get to a review in time before the end date, and that's where the plan will simply extend and roll over and essentially repeat itself, same funding and a year-long extension. And you can continue providing supports throughout that extension period and claiming for supports accordingly. I probably should explain a little bit more deeply around what do you do if the plan actually does end and a new plan replaces it and you're not sure how to bill for that. You don't have a service booking in place, for example, or it may have changed the plan manager. You don't know who the plan manager is. This is why I say you do need to continue providing supports, but how many days, for example, what's that period in time that you're comfortable to continue providing supports and then back claim accordingly? 90 days would be the absolute limit because the NDIS guidelines state you can't claim beyond 90 days or backdate a claim for 90 days. So I certainly wouldn't go that far, but 30 days I would say is reasonable to continue providing support and then back claim accordingly once you have that information. It shouldn't take you longer than 30 days to access that.
Yeah, okay. And Vicky's got a bit of a further down the rabbit hole point here. She's saying, clarifying, the NDIA is not making provider payments. The NDIA will not let us draw services from the new plan to cover the out-of-pocket over Christmas, but we couldn't leave the client on their own.
I might need a bit more context behind this one.
Yeah,
I'm more than happy to take this offline. Like if you want to reach out to me and the team, I'm more than happy to go through this. It sounds like a very specific example. That's totally fine. We work with specific examples and I love them because there's a real impact there. So please, we'll take it offline. Send me an email and we'll go through this with you.
Yeah, I highly recommend that. And then the final question, just to kind of wrap it up from Carl, is do you have a guideline on claiming for client hospital admissions, including shared supports? That's a hot topic.
Yeah, it is. And it's very frequent. What do you do when a client goes to hospital? How do you adjust your claims? Do you keep claiming? Do you not claim? What do you do? It's a great question. The NDIS have included an answer, but they haven't explained it very well. And that answer is a program of support. So you can actually wrap your scheduled support up into a program of support. Now, program of support was introduced, how long ago now? About 2-3 years ago. It came at the same time that hourly SIl came into place. So they removed weekly claiming as an option. They brought back in hourly. Not brought back in, they said you can only claim hourly for SIl now. We're not letting you claim weekly. And as part of that, they introduced a program of support, which was this 12-week-long program. And you could work out what the cost of supports were going to be over that 12 weeks and claim for that support, regardless of if the person attended the support or not, essentially. And it was a way to combat the difficulties providers were having. They've since gone back to weekly claiming, but the program of support still exists. And if you're a SIl provider, you can still use a program of support. And it follows that same concept. Whether or not someone attends that program of support, you can still bill as if they did. Now, one thing I would say about this is be fair and reasonable. One thing I encourage providers to do, for example, if there was one-to-one support data, so if you had a support worker that was just dedicated for that person, maybe remove that support worker for a period of time and not claim, but claim for the shared portion. So claim for the portion of shared support that they would have been contributing to that house that you simply can't cover any other way. And tie that under your program of support would be my suggestion around that. And that also works well if you've got inconsistent movement with someone coming and going within the SIl home that doesn't have a very consistent pattern when they'll be there or when they won't be there.
That's brilliant. Thank you for that answer, Adam. Well, listen, I like to try and keep these webinars bang on point in terms of time. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. There will be a recording sent out over the coming day or so. And you'll be welcome to watch this on the replay. It'll be on the website soon accordingly. But yeah, Adam as well, you're a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much for coming in today. It's been great to collaborate and, get real with some grassroots examples and share your experience with everyone. So thank you everyone for attending, and get in touch with Adam or myself. I really recommend that free health check that we've talked about before. One last time, I'll just quickly put that in the chat box. Click it now before we end the webinar, because these guys are professionals beyond belief. Like they just know their stuff. So Adam, thank you again for coming today, and wishing everyone a good afternoon.
Thank you for having me, Chris. Really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for coming along.
Good on you guys. You have a lovely afternoon. We'll catch you soon. All the best. Bye.